Hi all, I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's webinar, which is on the uses of GenAI to lessen the academic workload. We have three speakers here today and who have extensive experience in this area. My name is Michelle Luby and I'm chair of the Academic Society of Engineers Ireland for this academic year. The event has been organised by the Academic Society, which is a special interest group for engineers in academia, which aims to develop and share a body of knowledge that supports engineers working in academia, while also serving professionals with an interest in academic topics. The Society currently has 35 members on the committee from academic institutions across the country and some members from industry. There are also over 1,100 affiliated members of the Society. The Society organises events throughout the academic year, which would typically be webinars like this one covering topics of relevance to engineering educators. And we also recently held an in-person workshop on what's engineering girls out of engineering at the Engineers Ireland headquarters in Clyde Road. So today's webinar is of particular importance to academia in understanding how GenAI can enhance how we carry out our work, what are the advantages and limitations of using GenAI tools, and what are the ethical implications of these technologies. It's also important that students are prepared for using GenAI in the future workforce. I'd like to introduce our panel members today, Professor Alan Smeaton, Dr. Shane Loughlin, and Steve Walsh, who will discuss the strengths and opportunities, as well as the weaknesses and threats of using GenAI as a tool within academia. So Alan is Professor of Computing at DCU and was a founding director of Insight SFI Research Centre for Data Analytics. He is a member of the Royal Irish Academy and the government's AI Advisory Council. Alan has extensive experience in applications and innovations in AI in areas such as computer vision, machine learning, wearables, life logging, and educational analytics. He's experienced in giving scientific advice to government and actively participates in education and public engagement activity, including media appearances. Alan will be moderating the discussion today. Shane is the founder and president of the ESE Academy and is an adjunct lecturer at the University of Limerick. He oversees Ireland's MEng in Equipment Systems Engineering, an apprenticeship programme for highly experienced industrial practitioners. He promotes ethical AI through the ESE Academy's co-pilot-enabled tenancy, supporting safe, transparent use of GenAI in apprentice-based applied research. He is also developing structured AI demonstrators for next-generation biomedical manufacturing equipment at the National AI Studio in the AIM Centre in Sligo. Steve is a learning technologist with the Teaching Enhancement Unit at DCU. He has an extensive background in educational technology and instructional design, having previously worked at Columbia University's Center for Teaching and Learning, at the University of Michigan Center for Academic Innovation, and at the Detroit Public Schools District. He is a doctoral student at Columbia University Teachers College in their Communications, Media and Learning Technologies Design program. He's developed a tool into DCU's Loop that uses AI to create quiz questions based on single prompts from the lecture. So thank you very much, Alan, Shane and Steve, for coming along today. And before I hand over to Alan, who's going to facilitate the discussion, I'd also like to thank the committee members who I worked with in organising today's event, who are Anne Morrissey, Owen Clarkin and Shane Loughlin. And Anne is going to moderate the Q&A session. So I'll now hand over to you, Alan, to start the discussion. Thanks very much, Alan.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I hope you're all enjoying your lunch as you munch, and don't let any of the coffee that you drink dribble onto the keyboard in front of you. One of the things that we're doing in the structure of this lunchtime series is that they've asked me to give an overview or a SWOT analysis. So while you're going to hear me talking for about 10 or minutes or more, I'm not hogging the microphone deliberately. This is by invitation. So it's we will then moderate a discussion on the topic. So if you think I'm just going to talk, I'm just grabbing the microphone and hogging it, it's not that. So first off, one of the things that I like about this particular session is that at various points it was advertised as generative AI to lessen the academic load. Generative AI may help with our academic load, but we will still not end up in a place where we get Friday afternoons off because our load is lessened. right? So that was as one thing that's worth clarifying. And a second thing that's worth clarifying before I jump in is that when we're talking today principally about generative AI. The other forms of AI and other forms of machine learning and classification and prediction and so on, and computer vision applications and robotics seep their way into the academic space in many other ways. It's depending upon the discipline. But what we're particularly focusing on is generative AI and the form that it is most commonly manifest, and which is ChatGPT. So within our academic environments, I would see that there are 4 places where generative AI has already and can have an even greater impact. And the first is in the professional support services, those people who manage the registrations and timetabling and all of the student interactions and recruitments and graduation in any professional services in any organization, whether it's a university or whether it's a finance company or no matter what it is. There are great opportunities for using generative AI in those professional services, and that's almost like a given. A second place where generative AI can have an impact is in the teaching and learning function, and we'll return to that part because I think that's the part we would be most interested in. A third place where generative AI can have an impact is in the research across all disciplines. In particular, how we would do things like literature surveys, how we would analyze documents, how we would summarize documents, how we might even help to generate documents. But in the scientific process, in the humanities processes, in all of the places where we conduct research independent of the discipline, there are ways in which generative AI is and can further enhance the processes. And then the fourth and final place is research into AI itself. Research into AI itself used to be about computer vision and machine learning and domain specific stuff, but now it is much broader because it includes ethics, it includes applications of, it includes many other things. So while back in the day, so to speak, up to about 3 years ago, if you said you worked in artificial intelligence research, it was a very narrow domain. It was technical, it was machine learning, it was computer vision, it was robotics. Now, when you say you work in AI research, it can be a much broader spectrum of things. So jumping back to the second of those, which was the focus, which is on the teaching and learning function. Whenever there's a really disruptive technology, there tend to be 3 kinds of opinions. There's those who would be the enthusiasts who would look on it and say, oh, how can I use that? How can I exploit this? This is a great opportunity. And then at the other end of that spectrum, you'd have those who would be called the skeptics, right? Those who would dismiss it, who would think it as being a fad, they would think it'll pass, it won't go away, it's not going to affect things. And then somewhere in the middle, you've got the inevitabilists, those people who say, well, I'm not really welcoming this upheaval that's happening, but it's going to happen anyway, so I better get on board with it in some way. So it depends which one of those 3 buckets you would put yourself in. You don't always have to end up being an enthusiast. You can end up being an inevitabilist. But if you're skeptical about generative AI, and if you think it's going to go away, then you're definitely in the wrong bucket. So you need to either jump into the inevitabilists or the enthusiasts. And I'm in the enthusiast bucket, as you can probably guess. One of the low-hanging fruits and the easy ways in which generative AI is having an impact is in the dialogue function that it can have with content. And we're all familiar with the free version of ChatGPT, with all of the poisonous downsides that it can have in terms of mental health addiction, in terms of hallucinations, in terms of the energy footprint, in terms of all of those things. But in a very narrow niche application where a AI-powered chatbot is prompt engineered and fine-tuned just to stay within course content. And it is also configured so that it operates in a Socratic way. So it doesn't just give answers, it gives explanations, encourages dialogue. That is the low-hanging fruit, the almost like the first point of call at which generative AI can be used in the teaching and learning function. And if you think about it, when we learn something and when we either teach something to students or as students ourselves, we learn something, what we do is that we have different forms of dialogue with different knowledge repositories. So sometimes we listen to a lecturer. Sometimes we look at lecture notes. Sometimes we go to a library. Sometimes we read stuff online. But in each case, what we have is some form of a dialogue with that content. And as we dialogue with that content, we use that to scaffold our own interpretation of that knowledge. So it doesn't matter whether you're learning about French philosophy or you're learning about quantum mechanics, you find multiple sources and then you build your own model of that knowledge. And that's how we learn. And the typical ones that we would have in a third level environment would be lectures, workshops, reading materials, online content. And now we have the possibility of this additional content, which is AI-powered chatbots. And this dialogue with these kind of emerging forms of interacting with content have lots of positives associated with them in terms of their accuracy if they've been constrained and prompt engineered properly, in terms of the fact that they're neutral with respect to their response. It's not embarrassing to ask an online AI-powered chatbot a question that says, "I really don't understand what a p-value is. Can you explain it to me, please?" Or, "How the hell does linear regression work, please?" There's no embarrassment factor associated with that, whereas a lot of people might be shy and reticent about putting up their hand in a lecture or asking a lecturer a course. And in the case of learning, interacting with these contents, the goal isn't to win an argument in a dialogue, because when you interact with these online AI-powered chatbots, which are focused on particular content, it gives you an opportunity to grow through the exchange and through the conversation. And what that points to is a very strong endorsement of the constructivist way in which we learn. A lot of why we teach students is instructivist. They come along to lectures, they sit there, you present content to them, and they basically absorb that. But with the constructivist model, what you're offering them is the opportunity for them to build their own interpretation of the material, and in that way to grow their own content, to understand more, and then to basically, that's the teaching and learning mission. One of the things that Benjamin Bloom identified, and this was 50 odd years ago, was that those students who are tutored in a one-to-one environment tend to do better by a couple of standard deviations than those who are educated in a regular classroom. And while a lot of the early studies which looked at using AI chatbots to help with learning, they looked at using off-the-shelf AI chatbots, not those which had been fine-tuned to particular course content, and not those which had been prompt engineered to interact in a Socratic way in helping students or interactions to construct knowledge. So there's a mixed message and mixed literature around the effectiveness of using AI chatbots in teaching and learning. Most of it, I believe, comes from the fact that they're not all using those AI chatbots in the correct way. So instead of, and my belief is that instead of blocking artificial intelligence, remember that happened, that was nearly 3 years ago when ChatGPT came along. Whole countries and whole US states talked about, and indeed some of them did initially, let's ban ChatGPT from the country, from students, because it's doing bad things to students. Now you wouldn't even have that conversation happening. I think my view is that once we get over the comfort that comes with banning something, and we grasp the challenge that it brings to us, then this basically gives us a better, a more sustainable, and I don't mean energy sustainable, I mean sustainable in terms of how students are educated, a more sustainable version of what education will deliver. We want to produce students who are technologically literate, who are familiar with generative AI, who are comfortable with programming, using, configuring, and then basically manipulating conversational AI-powered chatbots to their needs. We want them to be able to navigate this world, which is full of misinformation and disinformation and algorithmic bias and lots of digital noise. Before I finish up, one of the things about working in university is that we're very independent of each other. There's no overarching guidelines or superimposition of how things should be done, which is then presented back to universities. When I teach a module, I have an awful lot of autonomy and independence in how I deliver that. Sure, there are scheduled lectures, there's scheduled tutorials, there's scheduled other kind of things. But in terms of module content, I can evolve that slightly from year to year, and I can choose to either include or exclude the support of conversational AI chatbots or other forms of AI if I want to. And that independence is right down at the module level. So what we see in our university sector as a kind of an SWOT analysis is that we have a huge variety, a huge range, a huge spectrum of people teaching modules who are either embracing it, who are the enthusiasts, or those who are with informed decision making, excluding it from their teaching. And if you want to either include it or exclude it, that's fine, so long as you're making that decision based on an informed basis. If you're excluding generative AI from a course because you don't understand it or because you don't believe it, then it behoves you to get on top of that, to improve your AI literacy, to make yourself more familiar with what it can offer, to understand it, and then to make that informed decision on whether to use or exclude. Final point I make is that one of the things that was published was only published in late September, so it's only like 6 or 8 weeks ago, by the HEA, was a sectoral perspectives. The HEA have done a tremendous amount of work over the last 12 months in talking to multiple stakeholders in universities, third level institutes, students, professional support staff, et cetera, and they've come up with this document, which I think is really worth having a look at, and it has 8 takeaway points which cover the deployment, the use, the adaptation of generative AI. First of those points is that AI is already here. So despite what we may think, practically all of our students are using it, and many of our staff are using it already. There's a need for some national level coordination so that we can learn from each other. The purpose of education and how we deliver it needs a rethink because of this extra modality of delivering or presenting content to students. The nature of assessments must change, especially those which are outsourcing the creative process to students in their own environments. Support and training for us as academics in the ways in which generative AI can be used is absolutely essential. But including generative AI in your teaching and in your learning isn't automatic. We don't all have to use it for everything. Inclusion is an option which is basically left at an individual academic's independent choice. The infrastructure to support generative AI is more than just software. And then final point they make, and I'll finish after this, is that leadership must guide, not just manage, but must guide. And that behoves our university presidents, our registrars, our secretaries, our deans, etc., to guide our staff in how to effectively deploy and take advantage of generative AI. And there's me 12 minutes up. Steve and Shane, switch on your microphones.
Switched on.
Good afternoon. So what we have on screen is just the three of us, and we're just going to have a chat, despite the fact that there are dozens, God, there's more than 60 people listening and eavesdropping on us, but we're just basically on a Lewis having a chat about this. So, Steve, I'm going to start with you. Was there anything stand out from what I said that either you'd say, yeah, I definitely agree with that, or no, Jace, he's wrong with that? Anything stand out?
Absolutely. Being in the position of kind of being within an institution, and I really take up that mantle of kind of considering what does good support for lecturers look like. As to one of those kind of aspects of the HEA perspectives that you're talking about. And I have to wear all three of those hats. I love the idea of being able to commit to either being a skeptic, an inevitabilist, or an enthusiast, but I feel it's kind of my job to wear all three of those hats sometimes simultaneously. And I think something that we're kind of considering and trying to be very purposeful and mindful of is creating spaces for lecturers to kind of experiment responsibly with these technologies and be very kind of cautious, but also forward-thinking and progressive in how we kind of expose our students to these technologies, both from the kind of the materials and the assessments that we're designing with using GenAI, and the way that we're creating kind of opportunities, or even, shall I say, mandates for students to engage these technologies in a controlled way within the kind of protected walls of the institution. So that's my.
And can I ask, in the 3 years that since ChatGPT has hit, have you seen? And I know it's just one institution. Have you seen a change in the balance between the skeptics and the inevitabilists and the basic enthusiasts? Has there been a move from one direction to another, or enthusiasts are always enthusiasts and they are only the enthusiasts?
Yes, I mean, I can talk about my direct experience and kind of the actual tangible research that we've done, kind of gauging that sentiment. And yes, you do see that with in the past year or two. I can't speak. We've got 5 faculties here at DCU, and I can't speak for everybody as a whole because it's a very diverse institution.
Mm.
But with the instructors and lecturers that I've worked with, you do see kind of the enthusiasts kind of jumping out of the gate and finding both the limitations and the opportunities very quickly. And I think, at the same time, what they're experiencing is that their expectations are challenged.
Mm.
And then as soon as kind of encounter limitations, they're there in January and then they're gone in July, so it's really hard to kind of put a frame around a moving target. And so I think that's one thing that everybody, it's very healthy to see people kind of becoming more flexible in their expectations, and where your judgment is on the state of ChatGPT or Gemini to produce, kind of reliable content at one part of the year. 6 months later, the output is entirely different, and that's going to continue to be the case. So yes, and I think there, when we see them moving from enthusiasts to inevitabilists to skeptics, I think it's almost kind of a circular dialectic,
Yeah.
and I think that's healthy, honestly.
Yeah, and I would suggest, or I would think that one of the reasons is that it's cyclical, is that generative AI isn't one thing, because the chat GPT we had in November of 3 years ago is very different from we have Gemini and we have Copilot, we've got so many more tools available to us. So we keep getting reset back to being skeptics, and then everything being inevitabilist. Oh, now it's able to do this. Oh, there's another tool. Set me back to that. So that hamster wheel of technology development means that we're basically being reset every time. Steve, anything, or Shane, anything from what I said stand out that you'd like to pick on to talk about?
Absolutely. Very, very interesting. Some very, very good points. I think just to set the scene, the type of students I would be dealing with are very experienced practitioners. They're not typically undergraduates. These would be very senior, close to CPD, work-based learning, because it's apprenticeship to NFQ level 9 and 10. So it's not per se exactly the same at undergraduate level, but these guys would have been exposed to AI in the workplace, but a very locked down AI, very controlled by the companies, etc., and so on, for the protection of data. And you would find then that they were moving towards using the free version of GenAI. And I'd make a huge distinction between free and paid for, because if you're not paying for the data, you are the data. And I would be very, very skeptical of something that I'm not paying for in that way. But with that backdrop, we started then the first phase of research. We started with GenAI, and the hallucinations were dreadful, really, as you start. But then we learned how you prompt and how you program it and how you make it better and how it tunes to you. And it was very, very strong. But then Copilot has come along. And the Copilot, by adding Copilot to the tenancy, we found totally different interactions. And what was really fascinating from that perspective, we found that you can just flick on recording and the transcript occurs. But you can get the recap at the end, or somebody joining in can get the recap. But we found that enabled totally different collaborative environment during seminars and mentoring sessions. And we found that the mentees really, really embraced that. They found it really, really strong. So that was from the initial scenario of where we were using it. And the second point then is, it became very obvious to us that you can, as a university or equivalent, you can say you can't use AI. And you get the conformists say, oh, I can't, I'm cheating. And then you get, not necessarily, and quite often they're sometimes the best students, but they disadvantage themselves because somebody else does use it, etc. So we took the approach, how can we enable them to use it, but demonstrate that they're at the higher order thinking in Bloom's taxonomy? So we get them to submit the chat. And it's not ChatGPT or Copilot, will you do this for me? Because that's not a very good chat.
Yeah.
But what we found through that is that they start to generate rubrics. So we get the AI to generate the rubrics for what's a good answer, etc.
Yeah.
And we use the rubrics to train the AI for the level of performance you want, because it's typically lazy. It will typically give you the quickest possible response. So it's been a very, very interesting journey, and we're only at the start of it, really, because now we would have 8 to 10 practitioners really engaging. But one of the really key points that I violently agree with you on, Alan, is that it takes the shame out of asking the stupid question. And Salman Khan did a very, very good presentation of the Khan Academy, that for the first time, everybody in the world can have a one-on-one mentor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's totally transformative. And that's what we're seeing, because it was really great to see one of our MEng senior practitioners writing an academic paper using AI, who's dyslexic. So it democratizes, it takes nothing away from his abilities, his technical abilities.
Yeah.
But he has a dyslexic weakness, but AI was bringing him through that to a level he could never reach. So it's definitely here. There's no
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. I was pleased in your response that you referred to prompting and you didn't use the phrase prompt engineering, because prompt engineering is an insult to engineers, because there's no engineering discipline behind it. There's no theory. It's just what words seem to work well with one large language model, which don't actually happen to work well with a different language model. And I wanted to give you another example of something which was similar to what you mentioned. So we're all on Zoom at the moment and we're on record. And if we had switched on the AI assistant, then the transcript of this would appear. And if anybody comes in late to this webinar, then they can look at the transcript and they can get a summary. So what we've done for large class sizes, not widespread, we've just done it as pilots, is the lecturer switches on a Zoom recording on her or his phone, and the lecture is being recorded in real time. And if there's students in the class who don't understand what was said and are shy about putting up their hand because there's 200 people, what they do is they go to the Zoom recording, they ask questions of the chat. What did the lecturer mean by a p-value? What did it? Okay. And they can interact with, so it's like having somebody attending lectures who's sitting on your shoulders, who is paying attention to what the lecturer said, and who's able to give you the answers to what you may have missed. And we found that that's pretty useful for students who are in a large lecture hall, who don't want to put up their hand, and rather than waste almost the rest of the lecture because they didn't understand the crucial part, they can then catch up with in mid-lecture and then basically jump on for the remainder of the lecture. But again, these are unanticipated uses of the Zoom intelligent assistant, which is part of the system that we're all using here. So the creative ways in which generative AI, it's more than just ChatGPT. Yeah.
We would have a very interesting example of that, Alan, just a couple of weeks ago. And because our class sizes would be smaller, 12 to 15, let's say, because it's a mentor-mentoree type scenario. But there was one of the mentees wasn't really grasping the transition from an implementation project to a research project and what you must do differently. And I wasn't getting it across and he wasn't getting it. But we went to the transcript and we both put in and asked it, what am I not saying? What is he not getting? And it independently arbitrated very, very fast and helped us get across that barrier very, very fast. And in traditional methods, that could be a black spot for maybe up to a month that we would lose with not getting the message across. But it happened within the meeting, within the session. So it's really transformative from that perspective.
Yeah, isn't it interesting to see that these examples the one that I cited for the use of generative AI in lectures and for Zoom, and the one that you've cited, and also the ones then that Steve has mentioned, they're all recasting of ChatGPT or its equivalent on Gemini or Copilot into other functions. So it's not using a dialogue, question, answer, how do I do the essay, In that latter case that you mentioned, it's looking back through the transcript, and it's taking advantage of in ways that I often feel that, we haven't reached the limit of the creative ways in which we can use generative AI as part of the teaching and learning function. I know that the National Forum for Teaching and Learning did started an activity where they try and come up with almost like an archive or repository of exemplars of how generative AI is used in teaching and learning. And for the first few, they were almost always a case of, let's take ChatGPT, let's fine-tune it with particular content and provide a Q&A system for students to be able to go and ask questions of those. But they've matured on to many more examples. Steve, are you seeing other examples besides the dialogue interaction system for generative AI in across the disciplines?
Yeah, I mean, when I was speaking with Owen about this, I mean, the use case that's kind of most front of mind for us is kind of the instantiation of a plugin within our virtual learning environment. For those of us at DCU, we call it Loop. The wider community would call it Moodle, and it applies. It's some of these tools. You'll find that they have kind of an uneven distribution for applicability across disciplines. So, I'm using a question generator that kind of creates multiple choice quizzes, and it's text only. So you can already kind of start doing the math, so to speak, that for the more visually inclined disciplines, if you want to do something around circuit design, if you want to do something around, any kind of visual information, it's not going to be as applicable for you. So, these tools kind of create opportunities that are, kind of have an uneven distribution of kind of relevance across disciplines. Now, when I just want to insert a thought here, putting the skeptic hat on, and thinking about what creating the kind of opportunities for responsible experimentation look like. And when we talk about kind of creating these tools or these new kind of opportunities where Gen AI is embedded within an existing system, whether that's something more, analog, like a dialogue, or something that's more automated, like, kind of taking place within a VLE. We're giving lecturers and in a lot of cases students the opportunity to just kind of press a button to create 100 questions, and if I end up using 2 of them, that's great. How do we kind of put guardrails on? I'm thinking about kind of the footprint and the sustainability aspect of what does it look like to kind of set expectations of what responsible experimentation looks like and put walls around, kind of responsible use, because it's become so easy in terms of this notion of scalability to just push a button, create 1,000 questions, and then, your job then becomes to kind of edit out all of the less usable ones. And that's something that I'm struggling with kind of more at the institutional level, in terms of setting expectations for safe experimentation.
Yeah, so that actually leads nicely to the next topic I wanted to talk about, which is that what I'm seeing is that there are pockets of groups of people doing really innovative things here and there and there and there. But what we're missing, as far as I can see, is the connections across those. So you can see what Shane would have done, and and the learnings that come from that. Do you see that as a blockchain when you're trying to dream up ways or conceive ways in which generative AI can be used in your discipline? And I'll ask Steve exactly the same question. So how do we learn the best practices from each other?
Well, what's interesting in the way we're doing it at present in our discipline, and is that because we have Office 365 and Copilot is integrated into Office, we can engineer the agents for within reason, whatever function we wish. But what's fascinating is, as per exactly this meeting, people post-COVID have become very comfortable with being on online meetings and being recorded and being transcribed.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating with that is, and the way one of the practitioners said it, it appears that everybody in research seems to start at the foundation and build up two stories, and then they go and do it again. The next person does it.
Yeah,
But I'm quite happy to leave the transcripts available, this individual is saying, so the next person can start at the third
yeah,
story. So the EU's vision for open science, open innovation, open world, which will hopefully get included to say open engineering as well.
yeah,
That concept that the learnings that occur through the one duration on the tenancy can be actually monitored and reviewed and used by the agents
yeah,
is totally different. And I don't think we've got to grips with how
yeah,
strong that can be, considering the fact that virtually every academic in the country has an Office 365 account.
yeah,
And I think it's quite possible for the HEA at that higher level to really help come up with some really good strategic methods there for those
yeah.
who want to contribute that those insights and that material year on year.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I agree. Going back to one that HA report, one of the takeaways was that national coordination is urgent, and I would interpret that in two ways. The first of those is the latter one you mentioned, which is about access to those tools, those same tools, and making them available on a sort of a national level in some sort of coordinated way. But the second aspect is learning from each other, picking up from each other who did what and what worked and what didn't work. And Steve, do you see the same kind of thing happening in your institution where people are trying to are doing things independently of each other and then seeing each other when to use your metaphor, when they get to that second floor, they look across the sky and they say, "Oh, you've done that as well. Oh, you've done that as well." So are you seeing similar kind of
Yeah.
independent developments?
Yes, what comes to mind is kind of the attention economy. We're already really oversaturated, and trying to kind of create connections, more organic connections, more bottom up kind of, as opposed to institutionally top down connections, is a real challenge. It would be great if we could all snap our fingers and create really kind of dynamic community of practice across disciplines. Making that happen is hard,
Yeah,
especially if it's around more synchronous events. This is fantastic. This is a
yeah,
great opportunity. Um, but yeah, I think there's just a lot of information overload, and it's hard to separate the wheat from the chaff in terms of everything that people are being told. It's there's a different level of authenticity and kind of relevance when lecturers are speaking from their own experience and what's worked for them. So I think that is always great when we can showcase good work and showcase kind of new strategies and things that are working, and more importantly, things that aren't working. So, but it's just which forum are we picking for that?
yeah,
Especially in these institutions, you know your own inboxes. There's a lot going on. So there's a coordination. There's just these different kind of verticals of coordination between programs, between disciplines, and then at the institutional level. So it's a big challenge, and I think that there's a lot of right ways to create those connections. There's not one single way, like the one email that's going to bring everything together.
yeah. I suppose that's part of the benefits and the strengths of universities is our independence. But a downside of that is that we tend not to take advantage of learnings which have been done either in other departments or other faculties or other universities.
Yeah.
That transferability isn't easy.
There's I would call that a necessary porousness,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, good way to put it. Yeah. So we've talked about various use cases and strengths, and of course, with every developing technology which is as impactful as this, and I don't think there have been as any technologies which have been as impactful in such a short time period. Can we discuss briefly about the weaknesses and the threats? So having touched on basically the strengths and the opportunities, the weaknesses and the threats that generative AI brings to our teaching and learning function. Shane, do you want to kick off with a few?
I think the first significant threat that we saw, well, cheating is obviously always going to be a significant issue if it's not catered for in the right way. But the 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 data breach threats and the using the unsecured environment, I think, puts an ethical responsibility on us to try and make the ethical environments available. and the trained environment. So I believe that's a requirement from a tenancy perspective, but from a negative perspective, there's a significant cost. So if you take um, the equivalent of Office 365 and so on is free to the universities per se, but it would be 30 euros a month, for instance, for a commercial license of exactly the same, but it's another 40 euros a month on top for the AI component. So I would assume there would be a similar cost that would have to be borne from an academic environment because of the energy consumption. There was a very good at the national conference there last week, the Engineers Ireland National Conference, the Green Spark. Dr. Tim Gregory, he's a nuclear chemist, and he highlighted the ongoing energy requirements. But by 2035, AI will require the same energy requirements as another continent. Uh, and that's in the 1,500 terawatts. You know, it's an enormous amount of energy. But I don't think the issue is where Steve was pointing out from text-based. The real hungry is the video content, the picture content. The amount of energy use on that is huge. But people are doing that on their phone. So I think you will find, and doing it for free because they are the data. I think you will find legislation will come in, or the big five data companies, they will start to self-legislate and start to charge, because at present they're actually buying nuclear plants in the States for the energy consumption that's required. It's the only way to respond fast enough.
Yeah,
so there are significant threats.
Yeah, so the consequent or downstream consequence of that then is that when they start to charge for it, if individuals have to put their hands in their pockets and swipe their credit cards, then you're going to get a divergence. You're going to get some individuals will be able to, pay the $20 a month or whatever it might be. Some universities and third level institutes may be able to afford a more lucrative licensing agreement with a big tech company than others will. And I think this probably goes back to that HEA report about there need for national coordination to give equal access across the institutions to all of our students to a certain level of access to the generative AI tools. Steve, any particular threats or weaknesses that keep you awake at night?
Yeah, and Shane, he kind of hit the nail on the head there with the most important ones. Obviously, the sustainability aspect, and just kind of this passive carbon consumption it's wild. If you kind of just as a regular layperson on the net, on a day-to-day basis, you're seeing all of these kind of passive transactions happen in which an AI is kind of triggered that you didn't even kind of consent to. And I think I'm wary of that happening within our VLEs and within our educational environments. I think our colleague of ours at DCU here in thinking about what these kind of collateral kind of threats that have emerged. There's not really an opt-out anymore. To the degree that we kind of institutionalize these technologies into our teaching and learning practices, there's a danger that we're acculturating students to this kind of this culture of consentlessness, where they don't really get to opt in or out of kind of using AIs on a daily basis as a requirement. And there's something to think about there, because we're still at that stage where we're designing in and we're kind of formalizing the obligation and the requirements and the mandates for students to use these technologies. And I just think that's a real big Rubicon to cross. And I think we're doing it a little haphazardly. It would be great if we could apply a kind of a slowing mechanism, but at the same time, we want to encourage progressive experimentation, and it's this real balancing act, and it's really hard to find the right balance of those two impulses.
Yeah, a lot of this comes back to AI literacy, and all of the people on this call are taking a proactive stance to give up an hour of their lunchtime to improve their familiarity with artificial intelligence. And we have a very almost like a polarized approach to AI literacy. Those who are the enthusiasts will embrace it. Those who are the inevitabilists will have embraced it, but the skeptics, some of them might still be in denial about it. And one of the things that the EU AI Act mandates is that by February of this year, there has to be an AI literacy program put in place for any institution or any company or organization which uses artificial intelligence, which includes all of our universities. And that covers not just AI in the teaching and learning function, but also artificial intelligence in the professional services function. And one of the things that we did, and every one of our third level institutes will have done the same, is prepare some AI literacy broadcast for staff. I know that in University College Cork, Barry O'Sullivan was particularly active in doing that. And I know that in DCU, one of the things that we did was that we got 4 or 5 of our known recognized AI experts to put an online Loop or Moodle course available and make that available campus-wide to all of the staff. And now, if anybody is from DCU, don't tell Dara Keogh that I said this, okay? So just keep your mouth shut about this. So one of the things...
Pause the recording.
So one of the things that he does, as I'm sure the other university presidents must do similar, is every Friday he sends out an email to all staff saying, who did what, and congratulations for this, and all that blah, 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 and that kind of stuff. And way back in February or March, he announced that there's an AI literacy course online for staff. And I can't remember the exact words he used. And it's available for all of you. And you should all do it. And you'll all enjoy it and have a great time, which I thought was exactly the wrong way to present it. AI literacy for those of us who are, at the coalface, whether it's either the professional staff or the academic staff and teaching staff, we're embracing AI, but it's AI literacy at the leadership levels that is one of the biggest blockers. We need our university presidents, deputy presidents, registrars, secretaries, etc., at the top levels to understand and to see the opportunity, and then for that then to trickle down, rather than a university president saying, oh, by the way, there's an AI literacy course, you should all do it. Exactly the wrong thing to do. I can say that now because I've left DCU, so we can't get me back in any way. Switch back on recording now, right?
I would
okay.
put forward, Alan, that it's not just leadership from a university perspective. I think there's political leadership needed as well too, because the second biggest threat for me is the geopolitical threat. And I think HEANet needs to be leveraged by the politicians to actually do a good, robust analysis as to where is the data, where is the AI, who's in charge of it, how can they, for want of a better word, pull the plug? Yeah. Because if we become very dependent on it as a nation, or as the EU or part of the EU, there's no guarantee that you're not operating on a platform that could be taken away from you very, very, very quickly. And I think for me, that's far the biggest threat, because once you got used to the calculator, and once you got used to the scientific calculator, if all of a sudden you had to go back to the logbooks, you might find after a few years you can't. So a good, robust analysis, because I'm not convinced that political leadership understands the implications, not just academic leadership.
Yeah, I was going to ask as a finishing up question, what would be for each of you your single biggest concern, and would that be your biggest concern?
Oh, yeah.
Shane? Yeah, okay.
Without doubt, because it's not getting discussed.
Yeah, Steve, what would be your biggest concern then?
I'm literally kept up at night by thinking about how much toxic sludge we're creating with our passive clicks. I mean, I'm not trying to be, doomsday skeptic here, but it's just, it has become the scale at which consumption has kind of exponentially increased over the past couple of years. It's wild. It's inconceivable. Yeah. And it does scare me. Yeah. And I just, ethical, responsible experimentation and how we kind of set those expectations is what's keeping me up at night.
Okay, so sorry to finish on a scary and skeptical and downbeat note, but thank you both, Shane and Steve, for having this chat. Will we let the other 60 or 70 people who are on the call back in by handing over to Anne, who's going to moderate some questions and some questions to us. Anne, are you there? Your microphone's off.
I'm here, yeah, I'm here. So I don't know if you can see me yet.
There you go.
Anyway, there we go. Right. Yes, we've had a couple of questions in the chat here. One was, I'll read it out as it came into me. Very interesting discussion. Where does everyone stand on the use of AI in postgraduate and master's or PhD theses? Where does the boundary between ethical use and unethical use, generating content versus students' own work lie? So it's kind of been answered, but maybe you want to enhance the answer, specifically focusing on the PhD doctorate studies.
Yeah, I'll give one answer to that, which is that it can be a great assistance in the part which is the literature survey, which used to be a thing you'd do in year 1 or 2, and then hope that you'd covered everything by that was going to come up in year 3 and 4. But now literature survey is almost like a dynamic process, because if you're working in whatever area it is, it can be so fast changing. So I think the big impact is on keeping up the scientific literature, and that's right across all disciplines. I know that different universities are introducing ways in which AI generated content or AI supported content, and they're two different things. AI generated content, bad. AI supported content, not necessarily bad. I know that there's universities working at ways in which they have to be declared and made public and made as part of the deliverable that this has been used to help to create this content in some way. But it's a state of transition. Yeah, very, very transition. And Shane, something particular at the CPD or master's level for you?
Well, I think the one for me with regard to the thesis, just maybe to speak from my own personal example, when it came to submitting the thesis, one examiner wanted it to be 100 pages. That was great. Then I was told it had to be 120, had to be rewritten to fill out to 120, and then at the Viva it had to be brought back to less than 100. That was nightmare stuff, really. And I've heard of other examples of people in the same. But with an AI perspective, it wouldn't, GenAI could have helped me do that seamlessly, let's say. Wouldn't have really altered the content, didn't change the work. So the wordsmithing, I find it helps a lot of people who would spend forever trying to get, for instance, an academic paper written in the formatting of the constraints of the paper. So I find it really helps a lot on the wordsmithing for a lot of people, and I think it's quite ethical, in my opinion. People may disagree.
Yeah, but we're all allowed to disagree. And back to you.
Just the other question has kind of been answered by the panel, but I'll read it out in its fullness and you can add to it. I'd like to ask the panel about their opinion on the impacts of generative AI and the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Particularly with the use of the energy usage, where it's going to take, I think one quote is going to need another continent's worth of energy to supply all the requirements for AI. And it's kind of related to that is, and the impacts of AI, and how do we educate our students on the sustainable use of AI, not just this business of opting out, as you mentioned there, Steve.
Yeah, Shane, you touched on this earlier on.
I think the one for me that would add real value, if we take, for instance, and I used to have to fly to the States to do what I'm doing now with GenAI, etc., and so on. And I can justify it in my own mind, but I think each one of us should be provided by the big data corporations that we're using our AI on with how much carbon are we actually using? Because I could be getting I could be giving myself a really hard time, and you could be using 10 times more. So it's how do you know how much you're using? So these are data companies, and I think they should be held to account to tell us how much we're actually using. So take the DMAIC approach. You can't do anything unless you measure. And who's using the most, and name and shame.
Yeah.
So I would just jump in there. I have been toying with that very idea for quite some time in terms of mocking up what you would consider token meters. And if as a kind of a fantasy, if you will, something I haven't been able to kind of actually materialize and put into the VLE, for instance. But if we had some kind of in situ marker of exactly like an odometer, how many tokens you're consuming on kind of day to day. There's no way there is no way to see that unless you have an account with OpenAI and you can actually see kind of the tokens that you've produced and consumed. So I think if we could make that more visible, something like an odometer, that would be a really, really useful mechanism. But again, they're not necessarily incentivized to make you aware of that,
Yeah. But all you need is one of those big tech companies to break ranks and to do that. And then the others can follow. And the more pressure that we as consumers put on, given our environmental concerns, and also I think that AI companies may actually welcome this, because it might mean that there might be a downing of the demand, the energy demand. So that might be a consequence that is an unanticipated consequence, second order effect, but might be welcome. So I cross my fingers and hope that if one of them does it, then it'll expose it, and then hopefully others might follow.
Or if the EU legislates that they must do it.
Yes,
that would be my hope.
Very true.
And then I can be a responsible citizen. But between then, Steve, I can't quantify it.
Yeah. So I use your day's work ends when the number of trees on your Steve odometer reaches the full end of the screen. Then you say, all right, I'm done and going home.
It's all the social interactions, I think, are the biggest guzzlers of how many times do you post pictures of your dinner and where you've been on your holidays. It's those kind of things that are guzzling energy as well. We've two more questions in the chat, so let's see if we can get time for these. The first one is, thanks for a very interesting discussion. If AI can handle many calculations, programming and routine design tasks, which skills should we prioritize in engineering education? And I'll leave it open for you to answer. There's some suggestions here in the question, but maybe you could think which.
Who's the engineer who can answer that? Again, I'm pointing at your man up above there.
Well, we are currently able to auto-generate the code for equipment at an unprecedented level. But it still takes very senior people to actually critique it and make sure it's done properly. I think the creative nuances is really what makes all the differences, and I think they're the type of skills that make all the difference. But the mundane assembler type language, assembler type code, and down into low level C, it's just shocking how effective and how high a quality, much better quality code than we can generate manually.
That's kind of I think the one, what else can we do? Do we need to go into the softer skills more?
Yeah, I think that it doesn't matter whether you're an engineer or a medic or language studies student or whatever it is. It's soft skills, it's presentation skills, it's interaction skills, but most of all, it's curiosity. That's the most important characteristic.
Yeah. Okay, and the last question we have time for here is, thanks for a really interesting discussion. We tend to talk about using AI through collections of anecdotes of good and bad usage. Some good points have been raised here about unforeseen impacts. How can we discuss and approach deployment and use of AI in education more systematically? Are there more objective metrics or measured improvements we should be thinking about?
Yeah, we kind of, that came up briefly, a little bit too briefly, and we got through that, which is that learning from each other, a national repository of who uses generative AI in education, how they use it and its effectiveness. Can't really see that happening, but certainly showcasing learning from each other, picking up tips. Steve would see this firsthand every day when he sees what happens in the School of Languages and seeing if that's applicable in the School of Biological Sciences, which might also be used in the business school, and it's just happened so quickly. 3 years ago, nobody heard of ChatGPT. I think it's this week is its anniversary. Like 3 years ago, and we hadn't even heard of this. So in 3 years, we've just come from nowhere to where we are. So I think that idea of some sort of learning from each other will happen. It just hasn't happened yet. It has to happen. It's one of the HEA things, outputs is that we have to have national level coordination. Would you agree with that, Steve?
Absolutely. It's really tough to find the right spot to kind of make a hole in the in the inbox and get people's attention.
Yeah, it's one of the things we're trying to do with the academic society is share knowledge among ourselves in the institutions all around Ireland. So we're only a small bunch, but we have had an impact, and we have shared knowledge already about how to teach sustainably, how to teach management, how to lots of other shared learnings from each other, and we want to continue to do that. Like today is the first step, I suppose, at doing AI and sharing what we know about each other among ourselves. Anyway, I'll pass you back to Michelle, who's going to say a few final words.
Yeah, I just want to say a huge thank you to the panelists who've come along today. It was really a fascinating discussion, and you've certainly increased our understanding of Gen AI and the pitfalls and the creativity and the possible uses of it. So it's been absolutely amazing to listen to. So thank you so much for giving up your time. And it's great to see so many here today. It really shows what an important topic it is. So thank you all very much, and we'll draw the session to a close. Thank you.